All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council's last webinar, 2019, The Evolution of CPACE in the Mid-Atlantic. As many of you know, VAEEC has been diligently working to advance commercial property assessed clean energy, or CPACE, across the Commonwealth for the past 3+ years. During the webinar, we'll be sharing the significant headway that has been made across this region, along with insight into the progress we can expect in the upcoming year. Before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping items to go over. First, I'd like to thank the Mid-Atlantic PACE Alliance, or MAPA, for sponsoring today's webinar. MAPA is a partnership between stakeholders in Virginia, Maryland, and DC, created to accelerate CPACE programs and projects closing in the region. Second, you can use the chat button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions or comments throughout the presentation. We'll have time at the end for Q&A, and questions will be asked in the order they were submitted. Finally, this webinar is being recorded, and we will email the audio recording and slides to everyone registered, and then we'll also have a link posted on our website. Today's speakers include myself, Jessica Green with the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council, Abby Johnson with the Virginia PACE Authority, and Dan Farrell with the Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. I joined the VAEEC in September 2016. As Outreach Director, I contribute to the organization's mission of advancing energy efficiency throughout the Commonwealth by overseeing our educational events, member engagement, and CPACE work. Combining efforts with other stakeholders, the VAEEC is committed to accelerating the implementation and utilization of CPACE by building a coalition of supporters and engaging with localities. The VAEEC continues to be a neutral, trusted resource on CPACE and is actively meeting with local governments across Virginia to discuss all available options and to help each locality determine which option best suits their needs. Over the past 7 years, Abby has been specializing in PACE financing, designing and developing programs in Virginia, Florida, Texas, Pennsylvania, and currently in Illinois. In Virginia, she's been instrumental in advancing PACE legislation, including fixing the flawed PACE statute in 2015, advocating successfully for adding resiliency and stormwater management to the law in 2019, and in amending the statute to provide for a statewide administrator in this upcoming legislation session. Abby recently created a nonprofit, the Virginia PACE Authority, to bring low-cost, open market administration exclusively to Virginia, and is currently the administrator for Loudoun and Fairfax counties, as well as the city of Petersburg. Prior to specializing in CPACE, Abby worked in commercial real estate finance, as well as an architect in Italy, and as a building science consultant. She has deep roots in Virginia, demonstrated in her service as a board member of DHCD and as a commissioner of VHDA. Dan Farrell is a program manager with the Division of Energy at Virginia's Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. Dan oversees DMME's suite of clean energy financing programs and efforts on CPACE, including managing MAPA, funded by a grant from the U.S. Department of Energy. Dan has over 15 years of state and local government experience in the high performance building, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and waste management fields. Dan serves as co-chair of the National Association of State Energy Officials Financing Committee and served on the board of directors for Veronian. So I'm going to start us off with a quick overview of what CPACE is and how it works before we take a deeper dive into the status of CPACE in the Mid-Atlantic and what we can expect in 2020. So CPACE is a tax assessment financing mechanism for commercial properties and allows the funding of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and water conservation projects. A couple of things that make CPACE unique is there's no money out of pocket. All 100% financing is included. There's immediate savings. The cash flow positive from day one. It's a long-term financing, so it's between 20 and 25 years, and that will help reduce your annual payment. And it's also transferable. So if building owner sells the property, the PACE assessment stays with the property, not the owner. There's several different types of commercial properties that can use PACE, including industrial, agricultural, nonprofit, and multifamily, as long as there are 5 or more units. Examples of projects that can be eligible for CPACE include HVAC upgrades, LED lighting, building energy management and control, along with solar energy, cogeneration, and energy storage. So for a locality to be able to even have CPACE, it must first be enabled by statewide legislation. And then once that is done, a taxing jurisdiction sets up the program. The assessments collected with and like any other property tax. As mentioned before, it transfers to a new owner upon property sale. And only the past due portion of the assessment is senior to mortgages. So this is an example of how CPACE works for property owners in Virginia. You have the owner working with a contractor or energy auditor to define the scope of work. The owner then submits requests for CPACE financing, and then will select a qualified capital provider to fund the project. A CPACE application is submitted and reviewed by a third-party program administrator. And then if that's accepted, energy-related upgrades will be installed, and then the property owner will be billed annually with their property taxes. So CPACE has the potential to increase social equity, create jobs, and conserve resources. CPACE can be used to preserve affordable housing, rehabilitate places of worship, expand access to clean energy for family farms, community-based organizations, any organizations that may not otherwise be able to fund these clean energy upgrades. To date, commercial PACE has infused over $1.1 billion in investments and has created over 16,000 jobs. And because CPACE funds energy efficiency, water conservation, and renewable energy measures, it reduces fossil fuel consumption, resulting in improvements to air, water, and soil quality. To give you an update on what VAEEC has been doing in the realm of CPACE over the last 3 years, we've had the objective to build a coalition of support among developers and property owners, contractors, and lenders in an effort to educate stakeholders who would benefit from utilizing CPACE and to demonstrate the demand for CPACE. We also have been engaging with localities to educate staff on how CPACE works and the numerous benefits it offers. And we provide localities with the resources to help guide them as they move forward with developing programs. In early 2018, we released a Virginia model ordinance for localities to use when crafting their own programs. The ordinance was commissioned following review and input from a wide variety of CPACE experts, and it incorporates key factors we think are crucial to implementing an effective CPACE program. Earlier this year, we created several GIS maps of CPACE eligible buildings in key localities. The maps help visualize the supply of CPACE eligible buildings within these localities while also demonstrating the potential demand for CPACE. And then also, MAPA partners created a toolkit to provide program implementation guidance for stakeholders, including local governments, program administrators, building owners, contractors, and lenders. And for localities, the toolkit really just streamlines efforts to develop and launch a CPACE program. So I am now going to turn things over to Abby, and she will be covering the current status of CPACE in Virginia, including which localities are putting programs in place and the new legislation that was recently passed.
Thanks, Jessica. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thanks for a great overview of CPACE, and thanks to VAEEC and MAPA for holding this webinar. As Jessica said, VPA, of which I'm the executive director, is the current program administrator for Loudoun, Fairfax, and Petersburg. These programs, Loudoun is open and the other programs are getting up and running, but on that note, I will actually move to the next slide to talk about exactly what is going on, because it's very exciting. The last year has really resulted in a lot of great strides for CPACE in the Commonwealth, and that is due to a pretty active group of stakeholders who has really looked to educate to local governments and property owners and contractors alike of the value of CPACE. So as you can see from this table, we currently have now 9 jurisdictions that have, well, 8 jurisdictions that have passed a CPACE ordinance, and 1 that is it's actually had legislation to develop an ordinance. So the first and oldest one is Arlington County, which passed their ordinance a little over 2 years ago. The city of Fredericksburg followed a little over a year ago in the fall of 2018, and then Loudoun County and Fairfax County passed their ordinances this spring. And then the summer was Petersburg, and then very exciting and recently, within literally the last month, we've had 3 jurisdictions pass CPACE ordinances, including the city of Richmond, the city of Lynchburg, which was just literally, I think, a week, to the point where I had to upgrade the slide deck because it happened so quickly, and the town of Dumfries, which is just in the kind of Northern Virginia area, in Prince William County. And so, you know, this is exciting for a number of reasons. I would say, number one, it's that with, you know, most of Northern Virginia enabled, and now we see a good part of Central Virginia enabled, and it starts to really help make a cohesive map where property owners and service providers can actually look for projects, do projects, where capital providers can actually look to originate. When you have just 1 or 2 here and there, it makes it very difficult. So we think that, you know, in 2020, we anticipate the city of Norfolk to be enabled, the city of Alexandria, of course, since they've already allocated funding for that. We also are anticipating that certainly Roanoke, as well as potentially Chesapeake and a few other localities will actually make the plunge. So I really do think that we are seeing you know, certainly a pipeline that's becoming pretty healthy now in the jurisdictions that are enabled, but there's definitely other local governments that have expressed interest in CPACE because of active projects. And so I reiterate that those of you on the phone that work with property owners or are involved in, you know, helping replace equipment in buildings as part of a contracting relationship, please bring it forward to your local government officials, to us at MAPA and VAEEC and BPA, because this is certainly the #1 way you see jurisdictions enable CPACE. It is having projects that need it. That would be the case with almost every locality up on the screen, frankly. So next slide. So in addition to just kind of giving a quick update on where we are in the Commonwealth and the exciting developments, some of which Dan will also talk about in a few minutes, I also want to just talk about what happened this past year in terms of how the CPACE statute was expanded to allow for resiliency and stormwater management. And we've seen some of this kind of language in other states. Florida has hurricane language. Texas has some level of resiliency language, Alabama, but we have the most comprehensive to date statute that allows for both resiliency and stormwater management. I just heard that Oklahoma also has resiliency. So we're getting there, but I think we have one of the best states, which I think we should be marketing, frankly, to all of the property owners and capital providers that want to work in the state. We have a very broad range of measures that we can use to enable both clean energy and protect our buildings with the issues surrounding sea level rise, flooding, and more severe storms. So just a quick definition of what resiliency is. And the reason why I have this on the screen, frankly, is because it's from the Department of Energy and it's very broad. So although I think we really probably want to start with how resiliency relates to the nexus between that and clean energy and energy efficiency, because I'll show later on there's a number of measures that really accomplish both goals. Certainly there's an opportunity when we look at this language to look at how it could impact your local government or your jurisdiction. So even it talks about there being deliberate attacks are naturally occurring. So I think about things like cybersecurity, You think of things as, unfortunately, anti-terrorism. So there's ways we might want to look at resiliency that are broader than what we typically think of as it relates to energy efficiency. Have the next slide, please. I'm not sure if I can actually forward it. So here's the language in the statute. I thought it was also important for us to see what it says because it's really important to see that it's in the statute and it does allow for broad resiliency improvements. It does, however, want to focus on how we can protect our shorelines. That's something that was important to the proponent of the bill last year, Linwood Lewis, also to Ann Phillips, who's a special envoy for the governor in terms of resiliency. So we think this is something also combining with the budget proposal that was announced last week by the governor to help our shorelines, to help our Chesapeake Bay, to increase stability for clean water and protection of our shorelines. That also CPACE works really well with that kind of approach from the governor's office. Next slide, please. So basically, yeah, we're gonna have to go one by one. I guess I can't get access to this myself, right? You have to do it, Jessica, I'm assuming, in terms of forwarding the screen. Okay, so we'll just go one by one. So basically, what does resiliency do? If you try to think about it in the context of what it means for us in terms of CPACE, it basically means that you can use CPACE to help fund more efficient operations. That means you can have backup power that can use it, like solar plus storage. You can make sure that your equipment is safe in case of issues of flooding. And you can also do things that will allow you to avoid the interruption of your business, which frankly is a huge issue in areas that are prone to flooding and storms. Next bullet. So yeah, I mean, in addition to flooding for things like raising your generators or raising your actual electrical mains, also there's been some discussion within Fairfax. We talked about ways to increase the thermal protection or insulation of the building. So I see that, of course, as terms of having a really tight building envelope, which allows for greater energy efficiency, and how that, could be financed kind of in the typical way of CPACE. However, you can also look at the fact that, as we're trying to look at ways to protect our buildings from fire, that also can be something that wouldn't necessarily think of as being energy efficient, that would have the impact, for example, of protecting multifamily buildings against fire or other types of properties that have tenants that are even potentially vulnerable. We're talking about social equity that Jessica mentioned earlier. So I think about sprinkler systems that often add a lot of cost to our buildings. However, there may be a really value to having them in there to reduce any potential fire damage and even lower your insurance costs and have it financed through CPACE. Next bullet. Thanks. And there you go. So really the biggest, easiest way of thinking about how CPACE applies to resiliency is looking at, for example, with flood insurance or business interruption insurance. If your building is resilient in terms of how it's protecting its internal infrastructure, you're going to be able to get cost savings on flood insurance. And talking to experts who work in Hampton Roads, this is a huge issue in Hampton Roads. We know that many areas, this is a picture that Bill Nussbaum, one of our board members, took of his, and also a MAPA cost share partner took of his street just a few months ago. This is not a huge storm. This is just, it rained, and this is what it looks like. And this is not sustainable, frankly, for one of the most important areas of our economy in Virginia. And so I think that, if you have measures that you can put in place that immediately will impact, obviously, the impacts of this kind of activity, storm, these kind of water surges on your buildings, but also protect you against really high flood premiums. It's something that really can make the payback for using CPACE very, very short. Next bullet, please. Also, I think, and I kind of think about social equity as well. We had a retreat with Pace Nation a few months ago, and a lot of the discussion was around how do we look at how it impacts everyone, not just, it's great to use CPACE for new hotels, it's great to use it for capital improvements on existing office and retail and industrial facilities, but it's really great if you could also have it work together to provide a safe environment for low-income residents, or for areas in which you may have mold, areas which may be contaminated by issues that related to resiliency problems with storm level rise. So it's something that we have to explore more. We have to make sure we define it correctly. But I absolutely see the fact that, you know, a resilient building includes really being something that's actually safe to occupy, frankly, and that includes reducing environmental hazards. Next bullet. And, you know, not to forget about stormwater management, this is used broadly in the district. Stormwater charges are very high in the District of Columbia. However, it's certainly for new construction in particular, there are, you know, more and more requirements to reduce runoff, particularly as it relates to the Chesapeake Bay, but also with the new measures and budget proposal by the governor. They're really looking to make significant impacts, positive impacts to our Chesapeake Bay clean water blueprint. So I think, you know, making sure that we have the water as clean as possible as it enters our ecosystem is really important, and CPACE can be part of that solution. This is just to say, you know, I think it's really important when talking to the program administrator, the county liaisons with us, and also with other folks who are heavily involved in dealing with resiliency in their own locality. We had two speakers at the VAEEC Fall Forum who spoke about Tom Nichols from Virginia Beach and Bill Egger from Alexandria, and they spoke specifically about what they're already thinking about in terms of resiliency and stormwater, how you can try to manage it, what can you do to try to meet that. So I think CPACE will fit well within that context of how they're planning already, what they're doing, but also I think we want to just discuss that you want to make sure you're doing something that's actually at least meeting, but preferably exceeding what's already there, because that's something that we think is important, that you're trying to make the building more resilient, not meet current code. You're trying to make it more energy efficient. So I think it's something that I've talked with a number of folks, including Dan and Jessica, about how we define this, and it's something we'll be working on in 2020, but it's something we see as something that you can go back to your local government and absolutely say, yes, there are going to be measures that you can use under CPACE related to resiliency and stormwater that will actually make a huge impact on your business or your property. Next slide. So just quickly, I wanted to go through, I'll just show you. You can click to the nice icons on the left. This works probably better as a when I'm actually scrolling, but Jessica's doing a great job. Just to show you a few images of what you can do, just some examples, but there's many more than this. And frankly, you know, we're experts in energy efficiency, and in CPACE, we're not experts in resiliency. So I think we're all trying to bone up, frankly, on how to the best place to start in terms of developing measures and then expanding them over time. So I think the easier ones to wrap our heads around from an energy efficiency standpoint are the ones that relate to these measures. So you have things like using energy storage as backup, having your critical infrastructure removed, making sure your building is extremely airtight, making sure that you have good kind of cladding that's non-combustible, things like that. So having backflow prevention devices, you know, in a lot of older buildings, you're not required to have them. They're grandfathered in for the backflow, but it's something if you could pay for through CPACE, makes it something that would be a valuable addition to the property. Next slide, please. And just quickly before I finish up, I just wanted to bring up to date with some executive orders that the governor has been issuing. Executive Order 24 is actually from last year, and basically it was an executive order to increase Virginia's resiliency to sea level rise and natural hazards. So a very broad order. It also developed a position that Ann Phillips now holds as a governor's special assistant to resiliency and stormwater issues within the Commonwealth. So part of that executive order, however, said basically you need to develop actual requirements for state-owned facilities, and also recommend other basically recommendations for privately owned buildings. So I'm not going to go into great depth, but I think it's important to think about these executive orders in the context of how we can work together, both with the governor and also within local governments, to make sure that we can use CPACE as a tool to accomplish what is required or recommended within these executive orders. So just really, if we have a second, I'm just going to kind of go over what is actually in Executive Order 45, because it's something that I think does impact us. Of course, there's requirements for state-owned properties in flood zone areas, and we know that that is something that is particularly the case in Hampton Roads. It also establishes floodplain management standards for state agencies. So again, this is all for local governments. However, within some of these requirements, they also talk about standards that can be applied to privately owned buildings. I think I have one slide left. Is that correct, Jessica? Yeah. So I just want to kind of we talk about what we're doing in CPACE throughout the Commonwealth. We're talking about what the governor is looking to achieve through his budget, through his executive orders. And then we try to think about how does CPACE fit into this puzzle? How do we best mobilize CPACE to be a leading tool that local governments can use through the private sector, that contractors can use as they are looking already at the buildings in which they work, that property owners can utilize in order to make their building a better building from the perspective of energy and CO2 reduction and being resilient, and also how they can save money as a result. So just quickly on the Norfolk one, I just want to bring up what they've done at the local level. They've increased their requirements for new construction, including being above 3 feet above the 100-year flood elevation. They have basically incentives if you are going to be building and you want to build to a certain standard. And we are actually, the state Department of Housing and Community Development has a bunch of work groups that work in different sectors as we develop our Uniform State Building Code for 2018 next year. And one of the subgroups is resiliency. So within that subgroup, of which I listened in the last 2 sessions, basically they're looking at Norfolk, and they're looking at, as an example, that one of the members is the planning director for Norfolk, but we're looking at how can we also look at potentially building code changes to help they'll be more resilient, require higher standards, and that's also going to make CPACE a tool that's even more attractive, because it's going to help pay for the added costs that some of these measures are going to require when you create more resilient buildings. So I believe I will leave it at that, but happy to answer any questions at the end of the session.
Thank you, Abby. Now Dan will talk about the specific benefits of CPACE in the Mid-Atlantic region, what MAPA has been able to do over the past 3 years, and what we can expect in 2020.
Great. Thanks, Abby. Thanks, Jessica. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Great. Well, thanks for all of you that tuned in today. We know there are some familiar faces and names out there listening in. Also some folks that maybe this is your first, you're still learning about CPACE. So I think we want to also focus in a little bit on some of the basic benefits in terms of why we're working so hard and so concertedly as a region on promoting CPACE. So I think just to shift back and kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of the issues that Jessica alluded to earlier, there are a host of benefits that come out of a CPACE financing program, and not the least of which are jobs that are created in the local economy in doing work, renovation work or new construction work on these buildings. There are of course, national specialty capital providers that focus on the CPACE market, but there are also increasing numbers of local lenders and regional lenders, banks and credit unions, et cetera, who are jumping into the CPACE game, and that's great. And these are great lines of business for these institutions to get into. Our friends at PACE Nation have, at least on the commercial PACE side, sort of crunched the numbers nationally from the various programs around the country. And at this point in time, based on the level of investment in CPACE projects, there are approaching 17,000 jobs that have been created. So, in terms of the building owner advantages, very clear value proposition. It helps to lower the cost of doing business by reducing, utility bills. which can free up capital for other needs for the business owners. It enhances the building value, and certainly in market value, and eventually the appraised value will catch up to that, and then that will enhance the tax base for the local community. So for those communities that are working very hard to redevelop right now, these are, CPACE really provides a very strong value proposition and something that local governments can do to take very proactive steps to encourage this type of redevelopment. So the building stock is maintained, upgraded for efficient operation and comfort. So, you know, with regard to property owners competing amongst themselves to attract tenants, you know, having a better building, having a higher quality building is a benefit in terms of both retaining and attracting tenants to your property and keeping your operating income up. And then not only this, but it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And going back to PACE Nation, they've estimated that it's over 9 million metric tons of avoided CO2 emissions nationally in terms of the buildings that have been retrofitted or constructed, newly constructed using CPACE financing. So by extension, that improves air quality. As Jessica mentioned earlier, it encourages renewable energy generation. And as Abby talked about, there's a host of opportunities for CPACE to be used to help better manage stormwater to reduce runoff. And so in general, the longer term financing allows for deeper retrofits in all of these areas. So I think you can flip to the next slide, please, Jessica. So MAPA by the numbers, we are as yet waiting on our first announced deal in Virginia. So I want to talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the great work that our partners in Maryland and DC are doing. So very active programs, growing robustly. Since the MAPA grant started in January of 2019, our partners in DC and Maryland have closed almost $50 million in deals. That covers 44 projects, and this does not include over $4 million of CPACE financing that the DC PACE program closed prior to 2017. So we are really excited to start seeing some of that economic activity in Virginia, and being a state that's ranked #1 for business. We'd like to start climbing up the ranks in terms of CPACE activity in Virginia. So what we've been able to do in conjunction with Abby and Abby's group, Jessica, the Energy Efficiency Council, the MAPA partner organizations, is we provided 8 webinars. I don't believe that includes this one today. We've also delivered 3 in-person workshops, 3 regional forums, a total of 900 attendees. We have developed the MAPA website and a brand. So we have sort of a uniform approach and a flag to fly over the various programs in the Mid-Atlantic region. And the website has become a good platform for CPACE resources and a good way to find the programs depending on which jurisdiction you're in. So that's, I think, a value too, is that it's a clearinghouse and you can go to find where CPACE is available in the Mid-Atlantic region and very quickly get there. We've done 8 case studies, and I'll dive into a few of those on the next couple of slides. And we've also built up a good social media base that we're getting information out on a constant basis to folks that are interested. So I was remiss, I didn't put the website address on here, but it's www.pacealliance.org. Or if you want to Google MAPA, you can find us. So next slide, please. Another project that we've undertaken and implemented is a project map. The idea being here is that as deals get done and get announced in Virginia, we can start populating the map here to show where those projects are. Many of these icons link to case studies that we've done, so you can sort of do a deeper dive and look at some of the particulars on these projects. We are likely to be having discussions at some point in time with other Mid-Atlantic states, including Delaware and New Jersey, as they get their programs going, to potentially expand the MAPA partnership to other states. And we are also going to do a big push in the last 6 months of the grant, which will conclude on June 30th of 2020, to start putting some greenhouse gas emissions, so putting some environmental impacts, putting some numbers on the impact that CPACE is having in the Mid-Atlantic region. So next slide, please. So kicking us off, no pun intended here, this is a soccer stadium. This is really a marquee project. Our colleagues at the DC PACE program were able to provide $25 million of financing for the DC United Stadium here. This was, again, new construction is a growing, rapidly growing segment of CPACE financing. It's about 15% nationally right now, but that is growing very quickly. And the reason being is as more programs are available, there's more opportunity for new construction developers to look to CPACE as another tool in the financing toolbox. And as referenced on the slide here, CPACE is a piece of the capital stack for this very large project. But what they were able to do with that $25 million is really is sort of reverse the value engineering process here to value engineer in some very progressive, very green features, including solar PV, including some very aggressive stormwater retention measures, LED field lighting. You know, this is really an exemplary project. Now, not every community is going to have a 20,000 seat soccer stadium, but you know, there are a host of opportunities for CPACE to be used for new construction financing. Next slide. Hoping that my voice will last to the end here. Okay, so I think project here, a great project in Baltimore. Our friends at the Maryland PACE program are you know, working very closely with the developer on this project. This is probably something I think more akin to what people typically think about with CPACE as a sort of retrofit or adaptive reuse of an existing building. This building is a turn of the 19th century construction. It's listed on the National Historic Register, so historic preservation tax credits are also a part of the package here. It's a mixed-use building. The developer is converting the third and second floor office spaces to apartments, so it will become retail and residential. The measures installed included envelope improvements, lighting and HVAC upgrades, and water conservation measures. So really great project there. Next slide. And sort of this, again, is a great project. This is a project that Volunteers of America did in Baltimore. This was the first CPACE project in Baltimore. This is a facility that provides workforce reentry services to folks that are returning to the workforce. It included build out of a 5,000 square foot vacant space that you know, they were able to finance into the package, along with upgrades to the existing 50,000 square foot facility that VOA already owned. That includes measures, envelope, their insulation, lighting, electrical, and HVAC. And CPACE provided some gap funding here alongside a foundation partner. So I think that in all of these cases, CPACE is part of the financing package, so it can ride alongside tax credits or private equity or foundation money to help get projects done. So it's an incredibly versatile tool And that's why we think it has such high potential for Virginia. So I think I've got one more slide. Yes, so what's next? As Abby referenced, the governor made a large announcement on last week regarding water quality and clean energy. And amongst the many things that the governor spoke about was the support for a statewide CPACE program. And that is, the nature of that legislation is to provide authority to DMME to be a statewide program sponsor. So what we are envisioning with this is a program that would serve smaller jurisdictions. Again, the Northern Virginia, Richmond, Hampton Roads, where there are large markets and a lot of buildings that could benefit from CPACE financing. They already have a lot of traction and I think are moving in the direction of starting CPACE programs, but what we're envisioning for the statewide program is for those smaller jurisdictions that may not have the resources or the building stock to necessarily support a third-party program administrator in their jurisdiction. If we work together and we aggregate those communities into a program, we can generate an economy of scale so that we have a single program that's serving projects in any one of those jurisdictions. And Virginia has has 95 counties, and I believe somewhere in the area of 40 independent towns and cities. So the scale of serving, with the goal of serving everyone in the Commonwealth with CPACE financing, we think it makes a lot of sense to provide an option for localities to opt into a statewide program. So with all that being said, that will be voluntary. It certainly doesn't prevent any locality from starting their own CPACE program. We're certainly encouraged to see the number of localities that are doing it, but we think there's value in an option that would allow smaller jurisdictions to be able to opt into a larger program and kind of create an economy of scale. So as I referenced before, the Mid-Atlantic PACE Alliance, under its grant funding from DOE, is going to be wrapping up on June 30th of 2020. And we are in the process of starting a separate 501c organization. And we have a board, and we're starting to have initial conversations so that we can sort of on-ramp the 501c while we're wrapping up the grant-funded activities. So we hope by the middle of next year, that MAPA as a 501c3 is everything is ready to go, and we're at the starting gate. So we'd like to be able to continue to maintain the website, continue to offer the educational forums that we have been offering, reach out to other states and jurisdictions and maybe have them participate as well. So try to continue to grow the impact while seeking funding from other sources. So, and I think that I'm going to continue on this last item. Jessica and I have talked quite a bit about some of the areas that VAEEC can expand its influence in. And I think in particular in the Virginia market, we see a need for education of lenders and capital providers. So that's going to be something we'll be working very closely on in 2020, is to try to educate existing mortgage holders and other capital providers about CPACE, and that we can hopefully help facilitate opening up the market here in Virginia and creating a very robust market for CPACE in Virginia. So that's everything I have, Jessica.
Great, thank you, Dan. All right, so now we will start the Q&A portion of the webinar. I see that a good amount of questions have already started rolling in, so thank you both, Bill and Abby, for answering those in the chat box. Just a reminder, if you do have a question that still needs to be asked, please use that chat function. And I think for the sake of the people who might just be joining by phone, not necessarily in front of the computer screen, I'll run through some of those questions and answers that have already been presented. Let's see. The first one, the minimum job size requirements with PACE in Maryland are fairly high. Will Virginia PACE be willing to consider smaller projects? So Virginia statute allows localities to set their own minimum and maximum PACE financing amount, so there's not a statewide minimum at the moment. Another question is, what are the current efforts to implement PACE for residential? The Virginia General Assembly hasn't had much of an appetite yet for residential PACE. So right now we're really just focusing on commercial. Virginia PACE programs can be used for EV charging stations. And so Abby provided a little bit more information into that. It is acceptable in Virginia. The minimum for projects for Loudoun, Fairfax, and Petersburg is $50,000. Fredericksburg is probably
and Arlington too.
And Arlington, perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
And Fredericksburg's a little bit less. So while EV charging is acceptable in Virginia, the minimum project amount kind of differs between localities. Next question is, how have capital providers underwritten resiliency and stormwater management deals? More specifically, what revenue streams are capital providers generally lending against when financing CPACE resiliency projects? Abby, I will let you go ahead and answer that one before we get into some of the unanswered questions.
Yeah, I started writing about it in the chat, but just I think that with stormwater has been underwritten in DC. We can look to them how they're doing it. Wind and particularly wind, but also some flooding measures have been done in Florida under CPACE, so we'll look to those measures and how they qualify them as examples to begin with. In terms of revenue streams, I mean, the most obvious one is reduction in insurance premiums, but actually the group of us here are looking at trying to expand that, get some case studies that can show the actual cost benefits. I mean, certainly if you're tying, for example, energy with resiliency, you'll see, for example, if you're generating energy through a solar array or through other kinds of renewable energy, and storing it, you're saving energy in addition to also being resilient. But I think from my standpoint, having worked in commercial real estate, if you're mitigating the risk of the building being damaged and being out of commission, that is a very strong value proposition. But I would encourage in the chat box, and I don't know if others can speak, but there's a few lenders on the phone or that were registered anyway. So if they want to chime in on how they view, for example, in Virginia Beach or Norfolk, not having to worry about potential flooding of a commercial business that's in a building, I would love to hear it. But it seems to me like a pretty strong argument.
Great, thank you, Abby. One of the questions that came in was any advice on how to connect with energy project designers and planners. Abby, you had mentioned you can look on Virginia PACE Authority and SRS's website for registered service providers. That is a good place to start. One of the other
maybe
questions that have come in,
USGBC as well, potentially.
Yeah.
For designers, yeah.
Another question that came in, what jurisdictions do you think will pass an ordinance in 2020 and which will open for business? So I can go to either Abby or Dan.
Your turn, Dan.
Well, I think Abby's table would be helpful to look at, just if you can back up to that.
I think the only one was Alexandria that hadn't. Oh, in terms of opening up, sure. Yeah, opening for business. That's different than passing an ordinance.
I think just I would call out that the City of Richmond's enabling ordinance does require the program to be operational by mid-2020. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Abby.
No, that's correct, July.
So there is something written in the statute so that I would imagine that that is going to sort of expedite that process in terms of you know, the city getting an RFP out and retaining a program administrator. I think just very quickly in terms of the statewide CPACE program, that's still an if. That's if the legislation passes. But again, I think there's generally good support for it. I think folks see the need and the value proposition there, and that will also be an opportunity for smaller jurisdictions to opt into a program that is sort of standardized for them, so that will shorten the time to market, reduce the amount of decision-making deliberation that they need to do, and then obviously reduce the cost. And we do have a small budget in there to sort of help once we have a third-party program administrator on board to sort of help them through the first few months of the program until we can get some deals into the pipeline and fees can be generated.
Great. Sort of a follow-up question to that. What is the timeline for Virginia getting a statewide administrator?
Well, that would be presuming that we can shepherd this through the legislative process. You know, the assembly will wrap up in March, so we'll know, you know, by March whether or not that's been successful. Generally, legislation is effective July 1. So the legislation would be effective July 1, 2020 in theory. If DMME were to know that we were successful in getting the legislation through, we could start developing the RFP in parallel, so we could have it ready to go on or about that time. So I think that's about the best I can do on that question right now.
Sure, thank you. Next question, what is the procedure for enforcing on delinquent PACE assessment amounts, and what is the time frame for taking action?
Oh, that's a complicated question. And unfortunately, it varies by city and county. I believe the cities can foreclose more quickly than counties statutorily. But typically what happens is you want to give the capital provider, the PACE capital provider, every opportunity to try to make the loan whole, and then if that's not possible, often if you have a first mortgage, the first mortgage holder will just continue to make the assessment payments because they would prefer to get hold of the property versus the PACE capital provider. If all else fails, then the county or city, typically in most jurisdictions, certainly the ones that we manage, would have agreed to enforce, to go through the procedure of starting foreclosure and collection of PACE assessments. And how that's done and how they're allocated will vary depending on how a county or city wants to do it. Some will allocate evenly the proceeds between property taxes, PACE assessments, and other assessments. Others will first pay themselves back and then pay the PACE assessment. So I think it definitely varies, but in general, that is the mechanism that many capital providers look to be able to get a legal opinion and securitize after they make the loan. These are the national CPACE lenders. But that's something that we could talk, Dan and I and Jessica could talk offline, because it is complicated. It's not a simple answer to that.
All right, and let me go ahead and put up our email addresses too, if there are any people that want to follow up with us afterwards. And we have time for a few more questions, so if you still have one, please ask it through the chat function. Another question that has come through is, what can stakeholders do to promote greater adoption and use of CPACE? I know Abby had mentioned during her presentation that having developers, contractors have a specific project in mind and going to the local government staff wherever that project would be taking place. That's been how we've seen a lot of the programs come about. So that's definitely kind of the #1 way we've seen. Dan, Abby, do y'all want to add to that at all?
Dan, do you want to say something? I don't want to I feel like I've been talking more, so trying to give Dan opportunity to.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great way for local governments to sort of demonstrate leadership on resilience, on climate change, on economic development. There's a number of different ways that local legislators can be approached about CPACE. It doesn't necessarily have to be leading with a statement about your environmental commitment, but it can be about a statement to, in terms of your commitment to economic revitalization of your community, supporting community-based organizations that provide valuable services in your community. There's just a multitude of ways to come at the ways that CPACE can benefit really critical facilities in our communities. So I think that certainly hearing from a developer who's got a project is that definitely gets the juices flowing, but there's a lot of other ways to sort of make the case and make the value proposition clear.
I would add relate to what Dan said, actually, and I was in our board meeting yesterday. We were talking about the Industrial Revitalization Fund that is managed by Department of Housing. And this is a small fund. It provides, I think, about $1.5 million to blighted areas, distressed areas and blighted properties in the Commonwealth. But there's 100% match to that. So, for example, if you're in a small local government and you have, a building that, that really, or an area that needs revitalization, you can use this fund from the state to help pay for revitalization, say, of a specific building that's been derelict for many years, but you need that matching funds. So those matching funds can be from other incentives, which could include CPACE. So, CPACE can certainly be layered with other economic development incentives that are at the local, state, and even federal level. But that's an example of where localities are like, we don't have the matching funds for like $500,000 just handy, or the private owner doesn't necessarily have that, but CPACE can provide that gap.
All right, well, we are coming up to the end of our hour, so just to be mindful of everyone's schedules, we will wrap this up, but thank you everyone for participating. Thank you, Abby and Dan, for speaking. Again, our emails are up on the screen right now, so if you do have any lingering questions or a follow-up question that you would like to ask, please get in touch with us. Happy to answer them. Again, the slide deck has been emailed to you, and this webinar was being recorded, so we will get the link out to everyone either end of the day today or early tomorrow. So thank you, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.